everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Atlantic Sill podcast. And I'm here with a new friend that I met and I clicked with right away. His name is Alex. And Alex, how do you say your last name?
Casillas.
Casillas. Now it's in my head and now I'll say it right from now on. I didn't want to be like that wrong last name guy. I'm sure you got that a lot in school with people not
Thank you.
saying the name right. But so we are here to talk about, I think, such an important issue. We've been on this theme for a while. We had um, Dan from the Trans Equity Coalition here, and there's such an intersect. On this podcast, we talk about disability issues, but there's such an intersect between the LGBT plus community and the disabled community, and I think it's really important. So, Alex, that's why you're here, and I always like to know. It's like I like superheroes, so I want to always know your origin story. So, you're an author. How did you get into writing? Tell us, how did you get into this world?
Yeah, so a little bit about me. I am a gay Puerto Rican author. I have my first book published in January through Four Elements Press, my independent small press that I created for much of this purpose, as what you were discussing, for representation, but also for showcasing the successes of people in marginalized communities. And I want to be able to uplift our important voices and kind of be a voice in this mob of voices out there that aren't always as supportive of us. And, those voices do kind of make it more difficult for not only our voices to be heard and our concerns to be heard, but also for action to be taken. And then also for in terms of representation. So, publishing is a big industry. It's a pretty monopolized industry. So I feel like we need more creators and small independent voices in that space to have an outlet for people who are definitely overlooked in traditional publishing. There's a big trend for publishing to, of course, promote celebrities and get that guaranteed buck. But really, publishing is about art, it's about representation, it is about individuals. And I feel like the more voices, the more complex, diverse voices that are being heard and being showcased, enable us all to kind of get a better sense of what our country really is, learn more about the world and our place in it and our place in human history in general. So in terms of writing, how I got here is from being an avid book lover, which a lot of you are probably avid book lovers, story lovers, TV, all that media is storytelling. And that's a key part of human experience throughout the history of humanity. So I studied at Stockton University to perfect that craft and that art. I studied literature and philosophy, and this initial book, the Immortal Philosophers series, Sunset in the Valley of Now and Then, featuring Dylan Eaglegod, is an important step in that direction in blending the historical, the philosophical thought, historical figures, and in our contemporary world, with the setting being in Ocean City, New Jersey, in more or less present day.
That's awesome. So I don't think people really think about why representation is important. And I was thinking about when I was growing up, and I'm 35, and you don't have to share your age if you don't want to. But like I was disabled, I'm gay, and it took me a while to come out, and I didn't see a lot of disabled characters being in stories, and if they were in the story, it was like a very minimal role, or gay characters, let alone both. like it was either you had
Yeah.
if you were in there, you were like one or the other. So, but I so talk about why that's important, because I think people, I for me, I think my process of coming out would have been easier if I saw more people like me in the world and in literature and in the stuff that I was reading. Because as you were talking, I was trying to think about like the first time I saw like an openly gay young person when I was growing up, and it might have been that show Degrassi, maybe when they had a gay, gay character, and like I said, and then maybe Degrassi again with Jimmy, who was disabled, who's now Jake the rapper. But like, I don't, I just feel like we're only presented one story a lot of times, and not that those stories aren't important, but it
Yeah.
really leaves out a certain, like, underserved populations, which can be really harmful.
Yeah. So growing up, I was an avid reader. I knew pretty early on I wasn't exactly the same as everyone else. Now, but what I did find myself doing in my reading was a lot of what we would call in like the academia as close reading, I would say, or in reading between the lines to try to, I don't know, search for gay characters in straight novels or search for, oh, maybe this is a little questionable. Ooh. And I would hold on to that and like hold on to it till the end of the book and then even kind of be thinking about it later on. So I bring that up because I didn't have access to novels depicting gay characters. They talk a lot in literature, like, in university, and when you are close reading novels and different short stories, they talk about how characters are built, and it's kind of like a psychological analysis. So between that, between like the psychological analysis of certain novels and even from history, my close reading skills in kind of searching for gay characters lent me kind of like almost like an advantage in uncovering potentially overlooked LGBT representations from maybe like the late 1800s, early 1900s, perspectives that like maybe my straight classmates didn't kind of pick up on. So I was kind of able to add another layer of perspective to our close analyses. Now, in terms of representation, reading and growing up, I didn't have those examples of what they would call the marriage plot in literature. There's a kind of a like the binary worldview, the nuclear family is represented a lot in literature over the last 100, 200 years in the USA more specifically. But who I was exposed to in university and only in university were authors like James Baldwin, who, while he was alive, depicted straight characters, depicted himself as a character, at a younger age, and his processes in managing his feelings like around religion, and then later about his feelings around sexuality. And one of the first books I read that kind of captured a real kind of almost like a visceral experience that like maybe I wasn't closely able to relate to, with the character having moved to France and he's experiencing love and infatuation with another gay character, but then also there's like drag queen characters and they're kind of in bars and they're kind of dancing around the city in a way that they are kind of able to be in their own little LGBT community. And that experience in reading that book showed me how powerful it is to have representation and to kind of have a different perspective and a different storyline
Right,
that's also not only about the suffering
right,
or
yeah,
the,
exactly.
yeah, like let me see some opportunity and
Right,
some examples of what maybe like a healthy lifestyle is like,
right,
that's not kind of involved in like alcoholism and stuff like that.
right,
And then outside of that, not disregarding, the work that we have to do within our community, to support each other, but to offer good examples, heroes almost. And that's kind
right,
of what I do with Dylan in the Immortal Philosophers. And to show maybe that, to showcase a lot of historical figures who might be remembered for their writing, like James Baldwin, but who maybe not the vast majority of people know are gay.
right, right. That's so important because I think role models for everybody is important, and seeing yourself and others are important. And Like, well, I love what you did. I love so much of what you said about looking for gay characters because it's like, and I'm sure a lot of your detection might have been correct or might have been like accurate, but it wasn't explicitly said. Like, like I'm sure in a lot of the shows I was watching and books I was reading, like the people with disabilities are 25% of the population, so they're there. It's just a matter of them being centered in a story. And like you said, if we did get a story, it's always about like overcoming some tragedy and overcoming like it's never just like a full complicated story a lot of times with like the good and bad to a person, overcoming certain things and failing in certain, like it's just kind of one dimensional, like disabled person saves the world or disabled person dies tragically. like
Yeah,
you know, so it's and when you're just out there living, kind of experiencing a little bit of everything, it's like can be very much in a box. So I think, like you said, getting away from the suffering without ignoring the real
yeah,
challenges that marginalized communities face. But like I always hate when people say like I suffer with cerebral palsy. Like I'm not out here suffering every day. I'm out here living every day. And some days
yeah,
are good, and some days are bad, and some days like it's one thing for me to say I'm suffering, but when people say automatically your disability equals suffering, it's just very telling of how people perceive things, and that comes from media and stuff like that, like that perception. Because people who say you're suffering think they're being nice, like they think they're being like that's they think like that's the proper term. And in their defense, if all you've seen through the media was certain story, it's like I kind of get it. I kind of get it. So what
yeah.
what kind of what challenges did you face? Like, how did you start? Like, okay, I'm gonna be a writer because like I've done some pretty challenging things in my life, but like writing is very competitive and very hard and very like what made you say I'm gonna actually do this, and not only this, I'm gonna use this as a vehicle to tell stories that aren't being told. Like, what was that process like?
Mm.
Like, this is gonna be my career path.
Okay. So that's multifaceted. And I just want to touch on something you said too, because I think marginalized communities are kind of pushed in not only like we're pushed in kind of a genre box. If you look at, like you were saying, whether like documentaries kind of like assessing us, or kind of in dramas I've found, like especially with the LGBTQ community, a lot of like the popular maybe movies or shows, they're kind of like drama, like extended dramas of like suffering and like falling into like alcoholism and stuff like that. Whereas like I think there's room to not be locked in a genre. So that was part of my drive to move into more of like a, YA fantasy genre, because I was finding that right now there's a lot of popular romances, and that's a very
Right.
popular genre right now. But I'm finding, the more we kind of lock ourselves into a genre, the less we're kind of permitted to kind of explore or try
Right.
something different. So I knew I wanted to be a writer kind of like at age like 12. I don't know why, but I also
You were
started,
one of those people who were like, I know what I want to do at 12. You were that. I was kind of that person too. I get
yeah,
it.
I was like a reluctant writer in the beginning because my dad brought it up one day and he was like, "You're going to be a writer." I'm like, "I don't know about that. That sounds difficult." Well, first of all, yeah, difficult. Second of all, I'm like, a lot of them, like, we only remember them after they're dead. Like, I don't know. I
I
don't.
like you. You look, young Alex is very practical. Usually it's the parents being like, you can't be a writer. You're like, I don't know about this, Dad. I don't know. I don't. Have we thought about the finances? Have we thought, we thought about the situation? So once
Yeah.
you had to overcome that in your head.
So, yeah, but I still loved reading, and that kind of, just harbored as more writing classes became accessible in school. So that's a big part of my direction was the accessibility of different arts programs like creative writing, like journalism, reading different diverse books and writers from different backgrounds, not only within the, standard American literary tradition. or canon. And then from there, so I started writing different fantasy stuff. So of course, you can probably relate too. We're not too
Yeah.
far in age. I'm a little bit younger, but like Harry Potter, Twilight,
I
even
was
if I
really
wasn't
I was really into anime growing up,
anime, yeah.
and video games and like that whole world of like just different. Because I think maybe one, I liked it, and two, maybe because I felt different. Like so that stuff like attracted
Yeah.
was attracted to me.
And like I don't know if you are a fan, but like Avatar The Last Airbender.
Oh, I
Like
love it. We could actually do a separate podcast about Avatar: The Last Airbender and how it's one of the top 10 shows of all time. In fact,
right.
if there's anybody who hasn't watched Avatar: The Last Airbender after this podcast, go out there and watch Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's a magnificent. It's one of the best shows you'll ever watch.
Yeah. And I mean, even just that one show alone exposes you to different, not only ways of thinking, but characters from a variety of
Right,
backgrounds and characters who are going through some of the biggest struggles of their lives, but they're still able to, one, have petty issues with each other that
right,
just make the show fun, but
right,
also maintain their unity and
right,
build themselves up in order to be enough to defeat the bad guy
right. Yeah.
and
I
to
think
defeat
that
the empire.
I think that's a great show because now I'm thinking, and if anybody doesn't know, there's a character in The Last Airbender who's blind, Toph,
Yeah.
and like I remember looking at that character and thinking this is how people with disabilities should be presented because she's clearly got a disability, but the whole show isn't about her having a like it's just like a piece of her personality, and it comes out in certain ways, and you see certain struggles with it, but then she's got so many other facets to her personality. She can be a jerk, and she can be real nice, and just like, and that's what I mean about like having characters that are human. Because I think what you're frustrated about when you see characters, even if they're from your background, is they're presented as one dimensional. Like
Yeah.
like the disabled person's always like a nice guy. I feel like a lot of the early LGBT, there was always like the gay friend who was like always funny, like and like some gay people aren't funny, like people are complicated. So I just, I really relate to what you're saying about how just the human experience is complicated and how stories are better when we have that.
Yeah. And I set on the, fantasy genre for the novel and the series. However, from reading a lot and studying a lot of literary fiction, I was able to kind of receive that depth of character so that characters kind of feel real and to kind of, blend the literary fiction into the fantasy in order to tell the deeper story of not only Dylan being an amazing hero, magical hero, but also the steps that he took to get there, the years that he spent closeted.
Right.
The we meet him when he's moving from NYU to Ocean City to get away from his toxic friends. And that's another thing. The company you keep really can determine your quality of life.
I
And
agree.
if you're not getting the support that you need, it's important for you to be able to stand up and say, hey, I need to make some changes and maybe I need to look at some different resources in order to get there because we can internalize a lot of that into like depression, anxiety, and then just stress. That's
Right.
not healthy for us.
Right.
So we meet him at a time where he's kind of reflecting on all of these things. He's reflecting on how he feels in a better place. And he got there because he believed there was a better place for him. And he's able to, we're able to watch him build himself up. We're able to see the strength that he was able to develop from living under that more or less oppression for so many years. And then just how much he's able to change about his physical experience of life by his determination and his will. And that's a lot of what this novel speaks to. You know, when you are living without a will, sometimes it can feel like you're not living at all, or when you're living
Right.
for the will of others, and then how to regain that strength of will, and then how influential it can be in not only getting you out of the problems that you kind of see in your life, but also helping others along the way. And yeah, you might not know that you're helping other people in these ways, but you can be healing something within them too. And sometimes that is more or less like, I don't know if I would use the word destiny, but more or less sometimes people come into your life at certain times and you're able to fulfill something in each other that's able to push each other into their next phase of life.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I think that one of the things that pushed me to come out was realizing like, it should be about being happy, like you being happy. And like I'm not, life is never going to be 100% happy because that's not life. But like if
Right,
you're in an environment where you're like, trust yourself, you're always feeling like sad and you're always feeling like people don't understand you, really consider changing that environment. Now I know, certain people have certain privilege and like it's easier for some certain people to say, move away than others. But I would also
right.
say, like, don't think that there's nobody out there that can't accept who you really are. And, it's not, if you're like, this environment is really toxic, it's probably because the environment is really toxic. Like, trust yourself.
Yeah.
And, I know everybody's journey is different, but, you know, I just want anyone to know that, like, what Alex says is true of like, there is happiness out there for you. And just try your best to find it and don't give up on yourself because people around you want you to feel differently. And so, but the other thing I wanted to ask is, what were were people receptive to LGBT material? What was that like? Was it like, were publishers like, and you don't have to throw anyone in the bus, but were they just like, this will not work, nobody's gonna buy this, or was it kind of both, or were they like, let's go? Like, I'm always curious, like, where we are at as a culture with LGBT acceptance, because I sometimes feel like we've come a long way, like on my happy days, and then other things happen, and I feel like we've gone back like 60 steps. So I'm always curious, like, where your gauge is at with acceptance in literature and just acceptance, like, in the world and in America. What are your big picture views on all that?
Yeah. So I will preface this with big picture views I'm not sure about, but I have
You're
my individual experiences.
right,
Because since kind of going down the route of publishing, self-publishing and creating the publishing company for myself and for us as a community, since then I haven't done much research prior to that. So this novel took 4 years to write, and then the year of 2024 to kind of submit to publishers, edit, all that fun stuff, and then finally publish. So I finished it 2023, December. I started editing for January 2024. By February, I was sending it out to publishers. So there are a few different classifications of publisher today. Obviously, the monopolies, we know their names. Now, what I found in those, in terms of submitting my work, there are hoops to jump through. So I found a lot of them will only receive submissions through an agent, which is great. Sometimes, and then I found, so you start here with, all right, let's find a publisher. Okay.
right.
Okay, nope, we need an agent. Okay. All right, let's look for an agent. Who's out there? Okay, I found a whole list of people who are working in my genre, who might be working with my people, who might be eager to publish. Let's submit to them. Oh, wait, they're not accepting submissions right now. So then we have, so that's the main publishers, the top five, top four monopolies. But then we also have their international extensions. So those I found maybe a little bit more friendly because in those countries they are trying to hear more voices from diverse backgrounds. So they might have a submission route for marginalized communities. So I was able to kind of submit those ways, still like no words back, right? You know, if you wait 6 months and you don't hear anything, email us. Emailed, no words
Mhm.
back. But then also the environment we're in, where, you know, many states are silencing voices and just
Right,
taking books out of libraries.
right,
This is a very real thing in our nation right now. You know, their businesses, they're looking at the audiences that they can capitalize on, and they're determining, you know, we have this budget to highlight this many voices. Where are we putting our money? Where are we going to get the best return? Of course, they are able to kind of take those risks that maybe a small press can't take. But then that moves us over to the small press, independent presses. Great, great sources. However, you know, in the 21st century, we are dealing with markets that are mostly online.
right,
We are dealing with the monopoly of Amazon and then the other book printing monopoly of Ingram Sparks.
right,
So, and then the marketing arms of these presses aren't as strong as, you know, the top five. But then
right,
again, most sales are coming right off Amazon. People are buying their books off Amazon.
right,
There are, you know, Amazon boycotts, but still statistically, books are being sold on Amazon, more so in independent bookstores, which is are great sources for books, you know, to not have to shop on Amazon. However, then that takes us to an in-between publisher type. Now, this is like a hybrid publisher. So I submitted to all areas because I wanted to see, you know,
Why
well,
not? Let's see what happens.
let's see, you know, if anyone sees value in this, right? So the hybrid ones were actually the ones who came back the fastest and they actually came back with responses. They were looking to publish the book. Now, what I found is they give higher royalties than top five publishers, but still, like with the independent presses, you know, you're kind of on your own for the marketing, more or less.
Right,
And then considering most books are either sold on Amazon or in person, really, what's the sense of a middleman, really? If
right,
you are comfortable with maybe getting a cover designed, if you're comfortable with finding an editor, if you're comfortable with finding a formatter, if you're not comfortable with those, by all means, those that's why those presses are there
right.
to be that publishing arm. You're the writer. With, you know, the history of our country being a entrepreneurial nation, let's
Yeah.
go. Self-made people, like let's go. I said, you know what? I'm looking forward to getting in front of my audience.
Right,
I'm looking forward to changing their lives. I wrote this for that as a guide of, you know, building self-worth, building up a sense of self, you know, working through the negativity of the past and then having a positive view for the future. I wanted to do that work. So I said, you know what? Let me do this. Let me do it all. Let me learn from it. And let me build this publishing company to be able to help others do it too, because once we establish that network is really what matters. Speaking to that audience, helping that audience, we know that's what we're going to do. So I took it on as a challenge for me because I wanted this book to be here for this year to help many people through it. And I think from who it's reached already, it's doing that work. And it's more than I could ever have hoped for. And just imagine it growing and reaching more people. And now, too, with, you know, New Jersey based Netflix studio, there's going to be a lot of producers, directors around the state, maybe even looking to produce something in the state that's set in the state.
see, everyone else
Things,
had a
yeah.
whole plan. He's got the whole, coming to Netflix series near you. But yeah, I never thought, and what you said is so true about like the market changing, and that was a really interesting. You just taught me a lot about the publishing market, but you're right, and like how people consume books now, and you can either like wait to be accepted by that system or like create your own world and see what happens because you know now everything is a lot more direct to consumer in terms of, you know, people want to meet the author a lot of times and they want to like, they want to feel like they know you and like so I
Yeah.
think what you're doing is very much the way to think about it. And so what would you and well, this has been such a good conversation and we'll start ending on this. What would you tell anybody who's interested in being a writer in our LGBT plus community? Well, like
Yeah.
what would you tell them sort of what they should do, what to prepare for? How'd you get here? That's what they want. That's what that question I got. Like, I get that question too. And like, how did you make this happen?
Yes. Well, of course, the journey is a lot less luxurious than the finished product. Like I said, 4 years of just working on this novel alone. So, what that took was a lot of life. I've worked in many different fields. I've gone through many different relationships in terms of friendships, in terms of, knowing different people from around the world, getting in touch, communicating, reading diverse voices, like reading history, listening to a lot of history. I think you have to live a little in order to write less. And even, but you know what? That quality of that work is going to be rich. And not being afraid to put yourself into your work and put the world into your work. Because, whether you're reading fantasy or whether you're reading memoir, and that's another thing, reading a diversity of works. So, listening to memoirs, reading historical nonfiction books just about the United States or different parts of history from around the world. Really getting a sense of getting a worldview, getting a deep perspective, and then just practice writing to an audience. You could be writing to yourself, you could be writing to the LGBTQ plus you from 10, 20 years ago. You could be writing to your next door neighbor, your misunderstanding parents or family members, and to keep writing in that way. And then also, what I started with this book was writing short stories. So, what I think about that is like mastering storytelling almost. So, the short story is kind of essential the essential story mode. That's more or less how people would communicate stories in more of like a short story form. A novel is, you know, almost inhuman in length because for a large part of humanity, we didn't have text written work. We had verbal communication. And Native American communities know, like more than anyone, the power of the verbal or the oral tradition and this power of storytelling because that's how they have historically captured and kept track of their origin stories and their histories, their beliefs, their religions. And then in the passing down of those stories, that's how new generations are connected to the past. So practice writing to a community, speaking to a community. That's why I think also listening to audiobooks is very powerful because you get not only the textual reading of it, you get a conversational reading of it. And that voice, the power of that voice is going to help you be able to capture the voice of your character in your work. And then to not be afraid of reading, becoming an expert on a genre and the genre that you want to write. Because if you know kind of the at least general structure that the audiences in that community are expecting, you can make sure your story is going to satisfy them, really, because we're in the business of satisfying a reader, or, satisfying them in an irritating way, because that
Yes.
also captures people and holds them. So, knowing what you're going for, not being afraid of changing what you're going for, and being determined to have a message, because that message is not going to only carry you through the writing process, but also when you're standing in front of people and they're asking you why, what is your story about? Why should I buy your book? Essentially, this is the message that you're going to get from it. And this is why I wrote it. This is why you need to read it.
I think that's really good. Just being, constantly learning. And I think that no matter what you do, if you want to be a writer, and when people ask me, like, I really want to get into advocacy and I really want to do nonprofit work, like the amount of audiobooks I listen to and the amount of like stuff I read that got me to be able to do this, it takes a lot of work. So, it's not just about the work itself, it's about all that preparation for when those
Yeah.
opportunities come, and reading stuff you like and don't like, and just, having opinions about certain things, and learning what is important to you. And actually, I can talk to you forever, but I'll ask you this one last question, because we
Yeah.
do talk about advocacy a lot, because that's what Centers for Independent Living are. Essentially, that's how they got their start. So not everybody, when I was talking about advocacy, it doesn't always have to be like protesting and all that stuff, although that's part of it. But talk about really how, like, inclusion is a form of advocacy, and how, because I know that drives a lot of your work too. You do care a lot about what's going on in the world and why that's important, because a lot of people, we have a lot of workshops about civic engagement and just getting involved. And a lot of people will tell me, I don't want to get involved in like politics. It's so toxic. And I get that. But there's other things you can be involved in and still be an engaged citizen. So just talk about like how there are different forms, and you can still advocate without doing the traditional sense. Because I feel like you do that a
Yeah.
lot too.
I do a lot on the political.
Yeah.
In terms of outside of, though, living in South Jersey, we have to find our communities.
Yeah.
But also, not being afraid of creating those communities, whether that be even with like a reading group. That's a
Yes.
great way to kind of bring people together. And through the bringing people together, the inclusivity, it is a sense of advocacy. What I do also through Four Elements Press, and like through fourelementspress.com, that's the publisher of this novel, but we also have an article series, many different series. Some of them do center around politics, some of them center around other stuff like LGBTQ authors. So, what we're doing is highlighting and showcasing LGBTQ authors. We work to, we're also working to highlight other voices on there, because, maybe I'm not an expert on every little topic, but in order, like, to have a stable and example of voices who are kind of working in those fields, and to have a platform to showcase those individuals will go a long way. And then also, I think the best advocacy is in your everyday, and really being someone that people will remember when they get home at night, not being afraid to say hello, not being afraid to open up to people, because when you look for connection in people, you'll find it.
I agree. And I think
Yeah.
just, especially if you're LGBT or disabled, like just being there is enough advocacy for a lot of people, and it means a lot. I know that coming out late, it really meant a lot to me to find my community, and to meet
Yeah.
people, and to learn that your experience is, it is different, but it's not that different. Like then once you find your people, it's like you start talking. It's like, yeah, I've been through that too. And I think humans just crave that. So just don't be
Yeah.
afraid to be yourself. And I know I'm not saying it's easy, because I know there are a lot of environments where it's not. So I'm not telling anyone who to put themselves in danger or anything like that. But here's what I will say: no, there's nothing wrong with you. That it is
Right.
your environment. And So I just think that's so great. Now we're gonna put all of Alex's links on the
Yeah.
in the bio. You're really gonna check out his website. He talks about all kinds of things. Super smart guy. Probably my favorite new friend that I've met recently. So it's just really important. And Alex, if you want to say anything in closing about your book, about anything else you want to promote, your life, your general life being Alex, whatever you want
Yeah.
to tell them.
So, yes, and I'll circle back a little to what you said before, but what you're saying about, knowing that there is connection out there. Like this book, I spent 4 years more or less at my desk and in my bed writing. So it's only recently, 5 years with the publishing and all that. So it's only recently that I've felt ready. And, in writing the book, I was able to speak to different issues I was dealing with over those last 5 years, issues my friends were dealing with those last 5 years. And in doing so, I was able to kind of share and capture a lot more of what the messages I was trying to convey to some friends in order to help them and kind of see a different perspective. What I couldn't capture in conversation, I was able to kind of capture here and share here. And it takes a while for you to be able to feel comfortable to share that in person too. So don't feel down on yourself for not being there yet, Life has many different seasons, and the best thing we can do is kind of respect those seasons, and when that next one comes, just embrace it with the full bloom that it comes with. And I hope to highlight a lot of voices doing just that. I hope to help a lot of you who might have aspirations in the literary area or even in the advocacy area to kind of have a space for that. And you can find me forelementspress.com. I post a lot on Threads. That seems to be the place where I am mostly on social media.
I
Blue
didn't know. I
Sky.
didn't know Threads was, is a good place to be. I didn't know that. I
I
gotta
mean,
migrate. I think I gotta migrate. I gotta migrate. Uh,
yeah, I was finding, Instagram is great for images and stuff like that, but I think Threads is becoming more for the text based. And then Blue Sky, of course, is another one. We're not as Four Elements Press or myself on X. We're on Facebook still, but myself, but not too much. So the website for our newsletter, you can get every article that we post on there, and we do video series is fourelementspress.com. And then the book is available, The Immortal Philosophers, on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any online book retailer, wherever you shop for books.
yeah, buy Alex's book,
Yeah.
and like I said, subscribe to his stuff. I am not an easy sell when it comes to subscriptions, but his Four Elements Press is actually it's really good. It's got especially for everybody, but especially if you're LGBTQ and looking for a community and something that represents something
Yeah.
that puts your experience at the center. It's really good. And also, I'll just end by saying, be kind to yourself. If you're listening to this and you're still struggling coming out, it is a process. I remember not being able to say I was gay to myself, let alone other human beings, and now I can say it in front of crowds. So if you're not there yet, it's
Proud
okay.
of you.
Yes, yeah, thank you. Well, you too, Alex. Like you guys are doing great things, and I just want to give a note for anybody listening to this. And it's like, man, there's something wrong with me because I'm not there yet, or I'm still trying to figure things out. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just unfortunately the way society makes you feel, and just continue to live your life and figure it out. So, and there is support out there. So get your
Yeah.
support, get your help. I mean, there is a lot of great resources out there. And if you're going to use the internet to make yourself feel bad, find the good in it too, because there's a lot of good in it too. So find the good and find your people in a safe way. So thank you, Alex, for being here. I'm sure I'll have you on again at some other point,
Yeah.
and we'll talk about Avatar. That'll
I
be the
can't
next
wait.
thing. That'll be the next thing. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and thanks for joining us. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.